Okay, welcome to SPA 502, Language Disorders. I am your instructor, Dr. Rachel Powell, and I'll be teaching you the spring semester of 2016. So about the instructor, you had me last semester, so you are familiar with me, but I'm just going to refresh you. I did my undergrad and grad from USM. I've practiced as an SLP clinician and diagnostician for over 10 years, actually. I have my PhD from LSU with an emphasis in language and literacy that I received in 2009. I just rolled off of Mississippi Speech Language Hearing Association as past president. I'm currently the legislative chair and the SEAL, the State Education Advocacy Liaison between MSHA and ASHA. And I serve on the ASHA Advisory Council as the Mississippi SLP representative. For this semester, your expectations for each class per week, you will have one PowerPoint, one video, and one discussion. You have one assigned chapter reading per week. You have 6 additional required readings beginning January 27th, around about that area, and you will just see on the assignments and the PowerPoints about when those required readings have been added. But I can always add additional suggested readings throughout the semester. You will have 2 group projects, one prevention project and one assessment project. The prevention project will be a group project where you present to a group of individuals to try to prevent speech language disorders. And the assessment project is a group project where you will present on the type of assessment that we use to test for language disorders. So some of you might do the SELF or the OWLS or the TOLD, different assessments that we use to diagnose speech and language disorders. You will have one individual project, a case study, which will include a diagnostic report and a treatment plan, and then you'll have 3 exams. So these are your group assignments for your prevention projects. Group 1, Prevention of Communication Disorders to a Parenting Class of Young, Low-Income Mothers of Preschoolers. The group consists of Georgia, Whitney, Melissa, and Amelia. Group 2, Prevention of Communication Disorders in Service to Staff for an after-school program for later elementary school students, grades 3 and 4. That includes Sarah Glenn, Megan G., Mallory M., and Rebecca. And finally, Group 3, Prevention of Communication Disorders to a support group of grandmothers who are primary caregivers of early elementary school students, K through 2nd, and that consists of Hannah, Mallory L., Victoria, and Megan M. For your group projects, for your prevention project, you will be expected to do a PowerPoint presentation and then a video of you presenting it. It can be videoed with your iPad and you presenting it, or you can download Camtasia, which is what I use to record our PowerPoint. So it's just the voice and the PowerPoint voiceover. You will be required to upload it to YouTube, so therefore everybody can see it, because with uploading it into YouTube, there are just too many technological issues. So be prepared to do a PowerPoint, record that PowerPoint, and upload your video to YouTube. The same will be expected for the assessment project. You will be required to do a PowerPoint, a handout. And there's a handout with the prevention presentation too. For assessment project, there's a PowerPoint, a handout, and the video of you presenting it. For the assessment projects, the Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals 5, that's Megan Givens and Mallory Little. The PLS 5, Preschool Language Scale, is Rebecca Varnador and Megan Marchiani. OWLS 2 is Amelia and Hannah. The CASTLE is Anna, Victoria, and Sarah Glenn. The TOLD Intermediate 4 is Whitney and Mallory, and the DELV, which is the Diagnostic Evaluation of Language Variation, is Melissa and Georgia. So about this text, this is Language and Literacy Disorders, Infancy Through Adolescence by Nicola Wolf Nelson, or Nikki Nelson for short. She's a leading researcher in language and literacy disorders. The text follows practical guide for language disorders and its connection to literacy. Nelson is developing, well, she has developed, and it is out for publication now, a standardized assessment for language and literacy disorders, the test of integrated language and literacy skills. And actually, if that's available in the clinic, I would like for a assessment presentation on that, but I don't know if your clinic has purchased that or not, because I want you to have access to whatever assessment material that I assign you. But I love this book because it's very user-friendly and it's very practical. I don't find anything in it outlandish as a school-based clinician. And in fact, I shared that with Nikki Nelson a few years ago at ASHA, and she was just thrilled to hear that. So it was very exciting to talk with her and discuss her text with her in person. The frameworks, so this text is divided into different parts. Part 1 is frameworks for clinical practice. Chapter 1 will focus on frameworks for guiding practice. Chapter 2, speech language literacy and communication. And Chapter 3, language literacy and related systems. So let's go ahead and launch into the chapters. Chapter 1, frameworks for guiding practice. You may have heard the term EBP. So what does EBP stand for? EBP is evidence-based practice. It's research-based evidence, which is scientifically based research published in peer-reviewed journals. So the ASHA journals meet that criteria, but not necessarily the ASHA Leader, because the ASHA Leader is not a peer-reviewed journal. Clinical expertise, the training and knowledge of the clinician and professional service providers, and then client values, abilities, and needs, what the patient, student, or client needs, their family input, and the cultural influences on the values. So those are the 3 components of evidence-based practice: research-based, your clinical expertise at SLP, but also what the client or the student values or what their family values for their instruction. So EPB and ASCAE, because we don't have enough acronyms, right? So ASC-AE stands for Ask, Search, Critique, Apply, and Evaluate. And you'll find this outlined in Chapter 1. Ask, you need to pose a question. Does this child have a language disorder? Is this language impacting them? So 2, search, review the literature and research. What is the research saying about this potential disorder? And you need to search for the evidence. C, critique, critically evaluate the evidence and determine the plan. A, apply, you need to apply your plan based on the research that you've conducted. And E, evaluate. So after you have critiqued and your plan and applied your plan to your treatment, evaluate the effectiveness of the plan. Is it working? Is this child making progress? Evaluate their outcomes using baseline measures, probes, and etc. And you will even see this in schools with the development of the new IEPs they rolled out in, I can't remember if it was 2014 or 2015. This is the first full year school implement. Yes, 2015 IEPs. All of these IEPs are requiring that evaluation of the effectiveness of the plan and your progress notes. You have to report on the progress of the student, and if the student isn't making sufficient progress, the IEPs are expected to be IEPs goals are expected to be rewritten so that you can make a more applicable treatment plan that applies to them and see those growth outcomes that are expected of you. So then you have this other acronym, PICO or PICO, depending on how you want to say it, forming a good question. So how do we form a good question to meet that ask criteria? You need to do the person, population, problem, perspective. Who the client is, what the population they represent. So are they from from a culturally deprived background or from a minority population? What is the problem in language and literacy? So what type of problem is presenting itself? What is the cultural perspective of communication? So some cultures, children are expected to be seen and not heard. So is this part of their culture that they're presenting with and not necessarily a language disorder? Intervention. Intervention is how do we treat this? Then you compare or contrast. You will analyze multiple methods. Are you going to use a whole language approach, or are you going to use an explicit systematic language approach? Outcomes. What functional measures can be used to determine if the intervention was successful? So how are you measuring that growth with the IEP? It's the IEP goals and objectives. You could use other criterion-based measures such as, for instance, a Common Core checklist of the Common Core expectations for first grade students or for second grade students in this particular areas of language. But how do you measure if that child's making progress or not besides your own objective views? So search and critique, how do we meet this? We utilize our resources such as ASHA to research the question. And then we need to critique the evidence. Was this population represented? Was it randomly selected study? Was there significant change as evidenced by the effect size? Remembering that 0.2 is small effect size, 0.5 is medium, and 0.8 a large effect size. And we're really looking for 0.8 or larger effect sizes in any kind of research-based studies. We also want treatment fidelity. Are there controls to the treatment study? I want to show you, I mentioned ASHA. Okay, I mentioned ASHA, and so ASHA has a great resource for your evidence-based practice and for you to research. So I'm here on the ASHA website, ASHA homepage, asha.org. Scroll down till you see Practice Portal, and this is a combined website essentially for all that you would need to know in these areas of speech language issues. So if we're talking about language disorders, we need to look at spoken language disorders. And it also includes the literacy aspect of that. If you're looking for information related to articulation, you might have acquired apraxia of speech, childhood apraxia of speech, but probably most likely speech sound disorders, articulation, and phonology. So I'm just going to click, here's autism. And then they have these other areas coming soon. So you need to be familiar with the terminology that research is using to, because that's how ASHA is classifying it on their website in the practice portal. But this is a tremendous resource for you to have one particular spot to go to research the evidence-based practice in these particular areas. So it tells you the incidence and prevalence of the disorders, signs and symptoms, causes, roles and responsibilities of us as SLPs, types of assessments, types of treatment, resources, and references. So let's look at treatment because that's where we were in our PowerPoint discussion. Intervention for preschoolers. Let's look at elementary school children since that's what I work with so much. So areas targeted, phonology, semantics, morphology, and talking about what types of treatment methods work. Okay, so that is just here's treatment modes and modalities, all computer-based facilitate communication, behavior intervention techniques, language interventionist, clinician-oriented versus child-oriented, and when we get into theory, your theory will help drive what type of intervention you choose to implement. Sensory-based interventions, and then service delivery options. That's how we implement our treatment services. So I wanted to show you that as part of this discussion. Okay, so we're still searching, critiquing the evidence, and that was a way that ASHA has that resource for us. And then apply and evaluate. So select a particular intervention method that you're going to use. Make the informed decision based on evidence, clinician expertise, and patient, client, and family values. Individualization is crucial. I might theoretically ascribe to one particular technique, but that technique's not working for this particular student, so I might use another technique which I have learned that doesn't necessarily ascribe to my theory, but seems to be what works best for that individual student. Then you need to evaluate the effectiveness. Use your baseline data such as curriculum-based assessments, communication and probes, and see if they're making growth. Everything should be based in context and not stand in isolation, because we can see growth in isolation but not see that carryover to students in their written language or their reading ability or their conversational language. So making sure that we're carrying it across contexts and areas. So treatment plans as a collaborative process. We want to develop a model of collaborative consultation. All involved parties must have input and offer valuable contribution to the intervention process. So in a school, for instance, your involved parties might be your classroom teacher, you as the SLP, and the parent. Special education teacher could come in there if it's a child who receives dual services. But you need to make sure that everybody involved with that child has a contribution, makes a contribution. It should be an interactive process, though. You need to ask more questions than give answers. So asking questions about the child's performance with the parent and what their expectations are. You want a diverse expertise within this process. All involved offer valuable information to guide the treatment process. And you want a mutual definition of problems. Everyone agrees on the problems that need to be addressed. Goals are developed together and not in isolation. Assessment and context. How do we gather this information then? One particular method is ethnographic interviewing. So we don't ask closed questions such as, when did he start walking? Do you understand his language? We ask open questions to gain insight to overall communication skills. Describe your child's language to me. Tell me how your child is if they're trying to tell you something. What do they sound like when they try to tell you something? You want to observe communication across the environments, not just in the isolated testing environment, but if possible, observations at home, or if you're at school, observations at school and within that classroom. You want to gather artifacts, writing samples, communication samples, etc., things that support the position that this child is having an issue that needs to be addressed and under what context. And then you want to interpret multiple sources of data, such as standardized tests, CBAs or curriculum-based assessments, language samples, etc. So, essential questions to context-based assessment and treatment. What does the content require? So, what is required of the child in the classroom? What is required of the child in a communication environment of talking to a parent or talking to a peer? What does the child currently do? So, what does their language look like right now? What might the child learn to do differently? So how do we want to change their language to make it fit better or more appropriately within the context of what they're using it in, whether it be home, preschool environment, or school environment? How should the context be modified? How can we change particularly the environment or the curriculum, making accommodations or modifications to that if needed to accommodate the child? So those are the 4 essential questions to context-based assessment and intervention. Then the World Health Organization, or WHO for short, definitions. There's an international classification of functioning, disability, and health. Body, which is structure and function, the communication process model. What processes are impaired or not within the individual. Activities, communication needs model. What does the individual need to be able to do to function well in important life contexts? And then participation, communication participation model. What opportunities does this individual have to participate in the important context of children's lives? So those are the questions that WHO has within their definition. And that is it for this week. And next week we'll be talking about Chapter 2, Speech, Language, Literacy, and Communication.